God bless the great state of South Carolina. Now, as I understand it, I'm the last thing between you and Mark Levin. That's a dangerous place to be. So I tried to think, what would Mark tell me? And I think what Mark would say is, Ted, keep it short. Defend the Constitution, repeal Obamacare, and kill the terrorists. And I gotta say, that pretty much sums it up. Let me say to the men and women of South Carolina, thank you for sending to Washington a strong, principled, freedom-loving, Constitution-defending, conservative knife fighter like Congressman Jeff Duncan. South Carolina and Texas, we got a lot in common. There were South Carolinians who came to the Alamo, who bled and died so that Texas could be free. You look at our states, we're southern states, whole lot of veterans. Gun owners. I've been told in South Carolina, y'all kind of like your guns. Let me say, as a Texan, I understand. We love God, and we are fed up with the damage and destruction coming from the corrupt politicians in Washington. "34 hours. We're 34 hours away from voting opening here in South Carolina. 34 hours, and I'll tell you, one of the things I've grown to love about the men and women of this state is how seriously you take the job of assessing the candidates. You understand the country is looking to South Carolina. Iowa starts, and it starts narrowing the field. New Hampshire continues, it narrows the field more. But then South Carolina, historically, its role has been to step up and ensure that the Republican nominee and the next president of the United States is a real and proven conservative. So on Saturday, we had the latest debate. It's a quiet little affair. Whole lot of love on that stage. But I'll tell you, and I think in that debate there were two questions that really rose to the top. The first was framed by the passing Saturday morning of Justice Antonin Scalia. Justice Scalia was an American hero. Justice Scalia was a lion of the law. He loved the Constitution. He loved freedom. You know, I had the blessing of knowing Justice Scalia for 20 years. He adored his wife, Maureen, who's Irish. I got to tell you, being Cuban, Irish, and Italian, that is a volatile combination. And they love their 9 children, their 36 grandkids. I got to tell you, Justice Scalia, in 3 decades on the court, changed the arc of American legal history, single-handedly shifted the Constitution and the interpretation of it back to the original understanding, back to the text and words adopted by the framers. As Ronald Reagan was to the presidency, so too Justice Scalia was to the U.S. Supreme Court. And his passing leaves an enormous void on the court. I think Saturday night at that debate, the men and women of South Carolina were looking on the people on that stage saying, who can I trust? You know, I have to say, our very Bill of Rights hangs in the balance. We have right now an activist out of control Supreme Court. But we are one justice away from a 5-justice radical left-wing majority, the likes of which this country's never seen. You know, before I was in the Senate, I was the Solicitor General of Texas, the chief lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. Held that executive post 5.5 years defending the Constitution and the Bill of Rights each and every day. We brought together a coalition of states across this country before the U.S. Supreme Court defending the federal ban on partial birth abortion, and we won 5-4. That means there were 4 justices ready to strike it down. We are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court striking down every meaningful restriction put on abortion over the last 40 years. We are one justice away from the Supreme Court mandating unlimited abortion on demand up until the moment of delivery with taxpayer funding and no parental notification. You know, the most significant decision, majority opinion of Justice Scalia's tenure was the case of Heller versus District of Columbia. I know Heller quite well because I represented 31 states in Heller before the U.S. Supreme Court defending the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And we won 5-4. We are one justice away. And what was the position of the dissenters? You know, the dissenters didn't say that some gun control laws are occasionally permissible. Instead, what the dissenters said is the Second Amendment does not protect any individual right whatsoever. They said it was merely a, quote, collective right of the militia, which is essentially fancy lawyer talk for a non-existent right. One more liberal justice in the Supreme Court will effectively write the Second Amendment out of the Constitution. It would mean that the government could ban firearms and not a single person here would have any individual right to challenge that illegal ruling in court. And there's religious liberty. In Texas, we defended the Ten Commandments monument that stands on the state capitol grounds. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court and we won 5-4. We are one liberal justice away from the court mandating that Ten Commandments monuments be torn down in courthouses and city halls and public parks all over this country. And I'll tell you, the biggest case of my tenure as Solicitor General was a case called Medellin versus Texas. Medellin involved a horrible crime where 2 teenage girls were assaulted and murdered by a gang. They did unspeakable things to these little girls. One of those gang members, Jose Ernesto Medellin, was an illegal immigrant who came across the border. assaulted and murdered those two little girls, the case took a very strange turn because the World Court, the judicial arm of the United Nations, issued an order to this country to reopen the convictions of 51 murderers across this country. Well said. It was the first time in history a foreign court had tried to bind the U.S. justice system. Texas stood up and we fought the World Court and the United Nations. I argued this case twice in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. On the other side was the World Court, was the United Nations, was 90 foreign nations, and was the President of the United States. And I'm sorry to tell you, that president was not Barack Obama. It was George W. Bush. Now listen, I think George W. Bush is a good man. Unlike some people in this race, I don't think he should have been impeached. But he received some very, very bad advice in this matter, and President Bush signed a 2-paragraph order that attempted to order the state courts to obey the World Court. Well, I sat down with my boss, the Attorney General of Texas, Greg Abbott, now the governor. And I got to say, it was a strange position for Texas to be arguing against the President of the United States before the U.S. Supreme Court, particularly when the President was a Texan, was a Republican, was the former governor of our state, and was a friend. And yet I'm proud to tell you that twice I went before the U.S. Supreme Court and said, the United Nations and the World Court have no authority whatsoever over the U.S. justice system. And no president of the United States, Republican or Democrat, has the constitutional authority to give away U.S. sovereignty. And we won 6-3. On the final iteration of that case, that too ended up 5-4. We are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court handing over authority to the United Nations and the World Court and international law and undermining the sovereignty of we, the people of the United States. What Justice Scalia's passing has done is underscored for the people of South Carolina and the people of this country the stakes of this election. It is not one but two branches of government that hang in the balance. And you know, if you look at Supreme Court nominations, the Democrats, they always get it right. The Democrats, every one of their nominees is a consistent left-wing knee-jerk vote. They get exactly what they want. Republicans, we bat less than 500. Many of the worst judicial activists have been Republican appointees. Earl Warren, Bill Brennan, John Paul Stevens, David Souter, Harry Blackmun, the author of Roe versus Wade. Every one of those was a Republican appointee. And let me tell you why. It's not that Republicans secretly want to put liberals on the court. It's that we've had too many Republican presidents that frankly don't value the court, don't value the Constitution enough to spend political capital to confirm a real conservative. Where they get it wrong is they say, I've got some other legislative priority I care about, so I'll just go with a stealth candidate. Someone who's never said or done anything, has no paper trail. Let me tell you something. If you've lived 50 years of your life and you've never said or written or done anything to demonstrate you're a conservative, you ain't. And if by some miracle you are, maybe the Supreme Court of the United States is not the best place to find out. So here are the stakes of this election. If, God forbid, we elect Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders or some other socialist, we will lose the court for a generation. But if, God forbid, we elect some Republican who makes the same mistakes of the Republicans of the past, appoints a stealth candidate who becomes a liberal, we will see our fundamental rights undermined for a generation. And I believe the question the men and women of South Carolina are asking is, who do I know beyond a shadow of a doubt and I give you my word that every Supreme Court justice that I nominate and confirm will be a principled constitutionalist who will fight to protect the Bill of Rights for our kids and for their kids. We can't get burned again. We've been burned too many times. And the second major question that the people of South Carolina and the people of America are asking is, who is best prepared to be commander-in-chief? Who has the knowledge, the experience, the judgment, the temperament? You know, temperament was something on display Saturday night. Who has the clarity of vision and the strength of resolve to keep this nation safe? You know, this week here in South Carolina, I rolled out a major new plan to fundamentally rebuild the U.S. military. For 7 years under Barack Obama, we've weakened and degraded our ability to defend ourselves. Under Barack Obama, his plan is to reduce the Army to 450,000 soldiers. That's too few to keep us safe, and we are going to grow it back to 525,000 soldiers. Under Obama, our Air Force has dropped to roughly 4,000 planes. We are going to grow it back to 6,000 planes to project force and keep us safe. Under Obama, our Navy has shrunk to 272 ships. That's the lowest it has been since 1917. 100 years back. We are going to grow the Navy back to 350 ships to keep this country safe. We are going to invest and build missile defense to stop against rogue nuclear states and protect the homeland. We're going to invest in cyber to fight against cyber terrorism and cyber warfare from China or North Korea or Russia. And let me tell you what we're not going to do. We're not going to allow political correctness to dictate what happens in the military. We are not going to be admitting refugees to America that could be infiltrated by ISIS. We are not going to be granting U.S. citizenship to people in this country illegally. And let me say this as the father of 2 little girls. We are not going to be drafting our daughters into military combat in the front lines. Two debates ago, when 3 Republican presidential candidates got up and said they supported that, I remember standing there saying, "Are you guys nuts? I halfway expected Rod Serling to walk out there saying, "You have entered the twilight zone." And I got to tell you, when it comes to ISIS, we will no longer have a president afraid to say the words radical Islamic terrorism. We will utterly and completely destroy ISIS. And one of the most shameful things of the last 7 years has been the president sending our soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines into combat with rules of engagement that have their arms tied behind their back. It is immoral, it is wrong, and it will end in January 2017. If and when military force is required, we will go in with overwhelming force, kill the enemy, and then get the heck out. And let me say finally this. There are 5,000 people gathered here today. South Carolina has been subject to millions of dollars of TV attack ads, of radio attack ads, of mailers. The time for the media nonsense is over. This is our time. The men and women gathered here, this election will be decided friend to friend, neighbor to neighbor, pastor to pastor, South Carolinian to South Carolinian. If every person here in this stadium today brings 9 other people to vote on Saturday, this stadium represents 50,000 votes in the state of South Carolina. Look around. The men and women gathered here have in your power the ability to alter the outcome of this primary, to determine, to make sure we nominate and elect a conservative. And I'll tell you this, we will have a president, number one, who we know will protect the Bill of Rights for the next generations. And number two, to every soldier, sailor, and airman and Marine, to every spouse and child and mother and father of a fighting man and woman, you will have, I give you my word, a commander-in-chief who has your back. Thank you, and God bless you.